Hello, my name is Tony Rockamora, and I am your guest host. Welcome back to Liberty Weekly. The show notes can be found at libertyweekly.net/85. Again, like I said, I'm Tony Rockamora, one of the hosts of Don't Waste Your Hate, and Pat has asked me to come on and guest host here, along with Daniel and Robert of Actual Anarchy for the third installment of Wild Wild Country. How's it going, boys?
Great. Thanks for stepping in and filling those tiny little boots of Pat's for us here while he's studying for the bar. And I think he's got a landing page for the entire series, which is libertyweekly.net/WWC. And I'm Daniel, by the way, of the Actual Anarchy Podcast, also the Last Nighters Podcast, which is a normie-friendly version of our show where we talk about movies from a Rothbardian anarcho-capitalist perspective. Our latest episode, which just dropped today, is on Mission Impossible, and that is episode 86. And I'm going to spoil a joke I was going to use on our next episode, but we're so 86th, we're almost 87. So go ahead, Robert.
Thanks for having me on once again, to do this Wild Wild Country. Looking forward to it. Yeah, let's get into this. Episode 3.
All right. And I heard you mention your last episode, so I might as well mention mine. Don'twasteyourhate.com/46. Jeff and I spoke about the Putin-Trump debacle that happened last week. We have some, our general style, if you haven't heard the show, is just a lot of times just political and cultural commentary, very casual style. And we have fun with it. Last few episodes have been great. So check it out, don'twasteyourhate.com. And again, let's get into this. So the last we heard was the end of episode 2. And at this point, the Rajneeshi, from what I gathered, they're coming into Antelope and they're starting to buy property. And then they start to take over the local city council or the local city government. And from there, the Antelopians, they come in and they move to disincorporate. So they're like, all right, let's just kill the town because the Rajneeshi are going to take over. Rajneeshi do end up winning the vote 55-42 to stop the disincorporation. So the town of Antelope, which eventually gets renamed to Rajneesh, I believe, it does not disincorporate. And at that point, we see that the Portland Hotel, this was how it ended. The Portland Hotel, which was owned by some people up at the compound, there was some kind of firebombing, as far as I understand. And then then we come into episode 3, and there's like an arms buildup between the two factions. It seemed to have started with the Antelopians kind of doing a little bit of intimidation, driving around in their pickup trucks with loaded shotguns, maybe even pointing their firearms at people, shooting. I think they mentioned like shooting street signs, something like that. So that happens. And then the people from the Rajneeshpuram, they start buying guns, a lot of guns, and they start shooting them and training. And apparently there's, I think the Australian chick, I forget her name, but I think she has some firearms knowledge, and she starts training everyone up. So that's where we're at. So I thought it was pretty interesting beginning to this, and then it's all about Sheila. I kind of feel like a lot of it is about Sheila. I don't know, Daniel, what are your thoughts on the transformation or seeming transformation of Sheila from kind of like the very beginning in episode 1, where she's just like a young girl who's fascinated with Osho, right? And then all of a sudden, like, people are starting to call her, I think the townspeople start referring to her as like Hitler and Satan incarnate or something.
Yeah, so I think you're right that this was a bit of an arms race. It started to build up because of the tensions, and there was intimidation. And once the firebombing happened at the hotel, I think that's when it dawned on the Rajneeshis that they were in a fight, and they really had to step it up and defend themselves. And they got a little bit more serious about that. I mean, when Robert was first telling me about, hey, you got to check this thing out, especially when you see these people wearing like their pink and orange outfits out on a shooting range, with their with their machine guns and shit, it was like a very funny sight to see. But it was serious, like they knew that they couldn't just back down, right? They couldn't acquiesce to this intimidation, and they were willing to defend themselves. And I think they had every reason and right to do so. So one of the things that Sheila did was she was willing to be the lightning rod. She was willing to take on the vocal, we're not going to be intimidated, we're not going to back down. She was out there in the media circuit telling people, hey, you guys are being assholes. And she'll say it straight to their face. You guys are doing religious persecution against us. And if you want to fight, you're going to get a fight from us. Like, don't fuck with us, basically. And I think that is a legitimate thing to let people know, like, hey, we're not going to be afraid of you and we're not going to back down. And if you continue to press this issue, then you're going to find that there are some consequences related to your aggressions here. And I laud her for that. Now, I think as we proceed, she does take the retaliation a bit too far, but that's kind of my take on this. Do you want Robert to chime in on that?
Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
Well, one of the things that I mean, on the issue of the arming, I think it's interesting and kind of hilarious how the Antilopians reacted to the Rajneeshis arming themselves. They almost acted like, whoa, what are these people doing? Why are they doing this? I thought there's a quote here from one of the Antilopians where they say, no way they have guns. They claim they're nonviolent. Well, those two things are not mutually exclusive. You can be nonviolent and still own firearms. That's just because you have a gun doesn't mean you're going to go out and attack people with it. And I think that they would understand that, but they didn't understand that with the Rajneeshis. It's like they had guns. The Antilopians all had guns. But then when the Rajneeshis matched tit for tat, all of a sudden they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I thought you guys were a bunch of peaceniks. Why are you doing what we're doing? It's like they're holding them to this different standard.
Yeah, Robert, I just want to jump off on that because this is like late 70s, early 80s. I mean, this is, you could be in high school and have a gun rack in the back of your truck and have a loaded rifle in it. And that was not a big deal back then. And having a shotgun or a rifle was not a sign that you're some psychopath aggressor. It was just a sign that, hey, you're a gun enthusiast, you're a hunter, you might, occasionally need to defend yourself and whatnot. We saw an example of that. We did a movie last year. What was that? The one where they're robbing banks with old Jeff Bridges, old Lebowski.
Hell or High Water.
Yeah, Hell or High Water. And one of the banks they rob, the townspeople go after the bank robbers.
Yeah, a couple of redneck guys just get in their pickup trucks and drive after them.
Yeah, and it's like, a totally normal thing. And if anything, in an armed society, I mean, those are the consequences that you deal with when you aggress against an innocent party. There's other people around to step in and defend them. So I didn't mean to derail you, but I just wanted to set it in, in the 80s, it was no big deal to have a gun rack in your truck and have a rifle in it. And the hypocrisy of all of those people who were redneck types, and they had firearms as well. And then to say, well, because you guys wear pink and red and have a lot of sex, you're violent because you have guns. That's kind of ridiculous.
And especially when, listen, it's hard to tell exactly how this went down. I mean, we're basically going off of this documentary. And of course, they're editing a 6-hour thing that went on for years. So it's a 6-hour event. So we can't be sure of the exact chronology, what was left out, but they definitely portrayed it as the Antilopians kind of not only just carrying guns around them, but shooting street signs and some intimidation involved. So at least the way it was presented, it seemed like the Antilopian people, were the initial, not aggressors, but I mean, at least threatening in some way before the Rajneeshis reacted. So
yeah, absolutely. And now, did you guys catch this one quote? It caught me because it was real fun. It happens twice in the episode, but the Rajneeshis are basically following the letter of the law, and the Antilopians, they don't like it because they find themselves meeting this formidable adversary that has, resources and numbers, and they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So there's one reporter who's doing a report on it, and I think he's reporting on the arming of the Rajneeshis in the beginning. And he says, everything they did was legal, but was it right?
Yeah, they said that a couple times during the episode. Like, it may be legal, but is it right? I think that was at least twice they said something like that during the episode. Sorry to interrupt, but
yeah, no, and it's just quite the anarchic question there. I mean, that's what we talk about all the time. That's how we analyze the world. Is we don't care really if it's legal, if somebody wrote it down on a piece of paper and a bunch of other people voted for it or not. It doesn't necessarily mean a thing is right or not. I don't think that they're having this deep philosophical insight where they then apply it to every other thing in their lives. I don't think they're developing or recognizing a principle. I think they're just saying, well, in this one instance, the law is wrong or something, and we need to use it to apply it so that the law is right for us and not for them. It's typical statist behavior, but I thought it was funny that they make that, observation that we make all the time.
And that's kind of the thing that's been going on throughout the entire series thus far to this point is the Rajneeshis are just trying to live their lives. They're just trying to develop this area that they wanted to live in and invite more of their followers, but they get thwarted at every turn. And so within the bounds of the law, like you just explained, is not necessarily a right or wrong type of issue. The local townspeople try to stop them, try to prevent them, and then they take whatever recourse of legal means that are available to overcome it. And then every time they do that, then the townspeople escalate it further. And so I think it's this episode 3 where the county gets involved, because now the town of Antelope couldn't shut them down because they got the city council and they got outvoted. So now they could issue building permits and things for Rajneeshpuram. So now they're like, okay, let's take it up another notch and let's make the county with, I don't know, health code violations or other issues like impede their progress. And so then they have like an interesting solution to this problem, which as soon as my wife and I were watching, we're like, oh, that's a bad idea. That's not going to end well.
Yeah. If I could piggyback off of, I think what Robert was just saying, but before I lose the thought, it's that this whole thing of, oh, well, one group is going to use the government to get what they want, and then the other group is going to retaliate and try to, take some kind of government action for what they want. This is just a microcosm of what happens with the state all over the place, like, federal, local, anything. It's just different groups vying for control of it in order to, gain that advantage of having the monopoly on force, and this is like throughout this whole series, you see the escalations going back and forth, and like how corrupt the people can be when they get the power and when they can get the reins of the government. So it's a pretty interesting theme throughout the whole thing. And then to go back to what Daniel was saying, and somebody mentioned before that they have a lot of money. Well, I think after they start talking about the guns, then they talk about Sheila goes on like a big media tour, and she gets she's on TV all over the place, like talking up the Rajneeshpuram, and she's a pretty feisty lady. But aside from her general character, which we'll get into a little bit later, they start having these festivals, and they're setting up communes like all over Europe, And I think a lot of money from those communes are coming into Portland, not Portland, but Oregon. And so they're flush with cash. I mean, they're straight up flush with cash. And, Osho is walking around with, really like shiny, expensive garments. He's, of course, they mention it several times. He's got like multiple Rolls Royces, I think like 20 of them, something like crazy like that. So these dudes are making money, which is, what you guys have mentioned in the past episodes as well. But then, like Daniel says, then the county gets involved. And then I think the first, and this would be where we'd want Pat to be hosting this show, because the legal analysis is kind of critical. But I'm going to do my best and just say that they brought up the separation of church and state became an issue, and they were saying that, okay, since the Rajneeshi took over the town government, they were not technically separated from their religion. The case was basically that they were taking their orders from Osho and I guess Sheila as well. So it was like a separation of church and state issue. So I don't know, Daniel, do you want to go off on that?
Yeah, and I think the counter to that was from their lawyer, and I forget his name, Swami something. He was like, well, this is clearly a case of religious persecution, because you have other areas of the country which are heavily populated by a single religion, and they make up the components of the government and the justice system and all of those, like the Mormons and the Quakers and et cetera. And my rebuttal would take it even further. Like, you've got the state, the religion of statism over everyone. They're all part of the same religion, really, when it comes down to having belief in some deity, and that is like a piece of parchment and undue authority and things of that nature. But I think that it was just one angle of attack for these guys, because we go back to the prosecuting team and all of them. They're just looking for whatever they can to bring these guys down. It was sort of like how they brought down Al Capone. It wasn't for any real crime. It was for tax evasion or something like that. They're trying to get him on a technicality, essentially. So
yeah, and that's where you see the real hypocrisy of the Antilopians and the government in Oregon. Is, they're worried about whether or not the Rajneeshis are doing what they're doing is right or wrong, but they never really stop to ask if they're doing what they're themselves are doing is right or wrong. I mean, there's one quote of the Attorney General of Oregon where he's talking about whether or not this violates church and state separation. Well, first of all the Bill of Rights says is that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So it has nothing to do with a bunch of people wanting to make a town, and then, well, who else are you going to have on the town council other than the people that live there? I mean, that just makes no sense. But then he says, what we decided could impact the many individuals' constitutional rights. I sure hope we're right. So he's not even sure if he's right about what he's doing, but he's just going to go ahead and prosecute them and persecute them. And like Daniel said, basically just find whatever they can to just get rid of them. They don't really have principles. They just want to win. They just want to get rid of these people, and they'll do with whatever means they have. And if they don't have it, they'll make it up. So it's just like an excuse of people to get rid of stuff they don't like. And they're not afraid to use whatever power and means they have available to them to do it.
Yeah, and that's a good point that you brought up about the separation of church and state. And it's really just Congress not being able to prohibit or institute something based on religion. But it really has nothing to do with what individuals do when they get together in groups or not. And it's sort of counter to, we just did an episode on the King's Speech where the King of England is also the head of the church. I mean, that is like a merger of church and state right there. So to think that there's no precedence for that, even though that's not what this is, but it's sort of like it's one of the left type tactics of, oh, that's unconstitutional when we support the idea, but then they trample the Constitution in every other respect, even on the same issue, just like viewed from a slightly different perspective. And I think Tony, you and Jeff were talking about this on your Trump thing a little bit. I actually listened to that episode right before this, and it's really good, by the way. Super long. You guys mentioned your Joe Rogan territory because it's almost 2 hours long.
Yeah.
but it was good stuff. But there's just so much hypocrisy going on, and it's like they cherry pick. I see this all the time on Facebook debates. People will cherry pick the Constitution when it suits them, and then they'll totally ignore it in every other aspect. You know, and even the parts they cherry pick, they'll be wrong about anyway. And I it's a little bit more of a tangent here. I'm not like totally scholarly about it, but I know like Tom Woods is big about knowing the Articles of the Confederation and the 10th Amendment and all of those things. And there's Michael Bolden, who has the 10th Amendment Center, but they're essentially anarchists at heart. And so it's always confusing to me that they'll make these arguments based on these documents, these holy writ, when deep down they realize they really are just goddamn pieces of paper, like George W. Bush said. You know, like they aren't binding. They're Lysander Spooner style. No one is bound by the Constitution, no authority. But it is an interesting angle that they take to become expert level at it, so that when they do engage in debate with people, they know the arguments inside and out, and so can win even on their turf, which I think is kind of an interesting way to approach things. So sorry to take us sideways there, Tony. Get us back on track, bud.
No, that's fine. You know, Jeff would be really good with this part of the conversation. He has a lot of, he's thought about the Constitution and its validity quite a bit. And, you know, I mean, in one instance, you know, he always says he used to be like, it's just a piece of paper, I don't give a shit type mentality. But he says now at least he's seen in, you know, how free speech is enshrined in our Constitution, and versus say the British Constitution, where it's not written down. And, you know, clearly there's been like a slow pulling back from freedom of expression over there, that at least, you know, to some degree it could stave off, you know, maybe what is the inevitable of the state. It could slow it down at least. And at the same time too, you know, I guess a guy like Tom Woods, they're going into their outlook on the world is still based on certain principles. And, you know, whether it's on a piece of paper or not, like the only way that worldview is going to work is if most people accept those principles of non-aggression and, you know, maybe the property rights, and maybe they use the Constitution because, although not perfect, there are pretty significant portions of it that, you know, enshrine or claim to protect or enumerate those rights that they all believe in. But, you know, it does take people believing in those rights and the existence of, you know, the you know, non-aggression principle, property rights, again, in order for the society to work. So it's an interesting question. Go ahead.
Well, you mentioned the First Amendment, and a friend of mine actually just flew through the St. Louis airport and sent a picture. And there's a little desk with no one at it, but over the desk, it has a sign that says Free Speech Zone in the St. Louis airport.
There's a zone for free speech?
Yeah.
Jesus. In the United States, I never heard of that yet.
Oh, you haven't? Oh, man, at like the Occupy Wall Street and other protests, they actually have a little cordoned off area that's the free speech area. And they make fun of it in Arrested Development, I think, where they put the protesters in a little like cube or a little, you know, caged off area and say, this is the free speech zone. So their protest is contained within a little chain link fence area. But yeah, that's what they literally have, you know, and my response to her picture was to send her a picture of the whole country. Like, well, this is the free speech zone according to the Constitution, according to the Bill of Rights.
Yeah. Hell yeah. I like that. I like that a lot. All right, let's get back to the show. So at this point, what I wrote down that, you know, the whole Sheila situation reminds me of another situation, but just to set the stage again, she was very nice, and then she starts to get a little bit more militant So she essentially, it seemed like you don't see Osho talking too much anymore. She becomes basically the spokesperson for Osho. As far as I understand it, she is the only one who's able to speak with him, and then she is kind of like the disseminator of information afterward.
Well, actually, just to correct you, I think he took a 4-year vow of silence, and then she became his mouthpiece.
Okay. Then maybe my comparison is not so apt. Yeah, I didn't realize that. My apologies. No, because what I was going to say was it was almost like Scientology when you have L. Ron Hubbard, and then he kind of fades away and he dies. He actually dies, but then you have David Miscavige come in, and he is just like a raving lunatic, and he comes in and he takes it to a whole new level of insanity. And I just felt like that's what she was doing here, but I didn't realize there was the vow of silence. So it's not quite the same, but she does kind of remind me of a Miscavige character in some ways.
Oh yeah, those personality parallels are, now that you mention, I didn't think of that until you said it, but now that you said it, yeah, those are glaring. Those are very type A, strange kind of psycho personalities. Yeah.
Yeah, and she eventually she gets like a house, and in her house it's like some huge compound where like the living room, it's like this massive carpeted living room where people are sitting Indian style and talking, and Sheila's running the whole thing. Am I wrong, Daniel, or was it called Jesus Grove?
That sounds kind of right.
I thought I heard them say
Robert?
Jesus Grove twice, and I was like, why would it be Jesus Grove? But it sounded very sinister and apropos, and also like impossible because they're coming from India. So I don't know why they would name it Jesus Grove, but it sounded like that when they said it.
I think this might have to do, and Robert, you can chime in on this in a bit, with the whole new agey kind of perspective at the time. Like I think in one of the previous episodes, I mentioned how my wife and I went to see an apportation medium, and he was producing gemstones from his mouth that he said were coming from Master Jesus and Master Aristotle and Master whatever. Like pick any prominent philosopher in history or someone significant in history, and he'll have referenced that person in some respect. And I feel like that's sort of what New Ageism sort of does in some ways, where they'll borrow from other religions and other famous or well-known concepts and people, influential figures, and kind of pepper them throughout their concepts to lend them a little bit of familiarity and maybe some name dropping, like, oh, this is credible because we talked about Jesus, or this is credible because we talked about Aristotle. I don't know. I just kind of get that vibe from some of it. And Robert, some of the stories you've told me about being on that island with the serpent people is that they seem to be borrowing from other religions and other stories. Like they're basically J.K. Rowling and rap gaming their religion together. You picking up what I'm putting down here?
Yeah, you got to piggyback for legitimacy. Absolutely right. If you can reference other religious figures or ideas or histories, it lends some credibility to what you're saying, even if you're just making the whole thing up. That's the vibe that I definitely get from most New Agey types. I mean, I really think, most New Ageism is fairly harmless. It's, if you want to sit around and in a circle and, beat on a drum and wear crystals and think that, Jesus is talking through the crystal, or somebody that's a reptile is talking to you from, Queequox or whatever. I mean, I don't care. You do what you want. That gives you some kind of happiness, some kind of purpose. Go for it. But it does weird people out. And we see it kind of here. Not that necessarily the Rajneeshis were doing this sort of thing, but this was just a big culture clash on a big scale. Like if a bunch of New Agers all of a sudden wanted to move into a town and kind of upset the culture, maybe we would see a similar type of thing happening.
Now, was it this episode, Tony and Robert, where the inside footage of one of their ceremonies got leaked out as a movie premiere?
Yes. Yep. That happened in episode 3. And I guess all the local Antilopians, somehow it was presented to them in the theater. I guess they all went to see it. And I don't know, some European guy who made the movie. And yeah, that started freaking people out. And then I think you saw the comparisons. I don't know if that maybe it was episode 2, but they did make comparisons to like the Jonestown stuff, which you mentioned in the last episode. But yeah, they went through like that crazy meditation, and this was all caught on tape, and they were like, totally naked. Like I don't know. I don't know if they were in an orgy, but they were just like, 20, 30 people in a room naked, like screaming and going through that whole like 4 steps that they spoke about it in the first episode, the 4 like steps that they go through of, I don't even know what they call it, the process, but I know it ends in silence. That's all I remember.
Yeah, it's like their tantric yoga or whatever. And I think we touched on it at the end of episode 1, but essentially what they're doing is they're hyperventilating and they're expending a lot of energy, and they're going to have a physical sensation as a result of that. And so it's going to help make whatever experience they've had be more indelible and more memorable. It's sort of like an initiation, like getting into a fraternity or even a gang, or going through like, I don't know, like a military indoctrination where they like break you down and then build you back up. It kind of has that kind of flavor to it to me. So it sort of, people will go through that and go, oh, I definitely felt something. This is real. I feel different now because I went through this.
Yeah. So this was one of the factors that again started or continued to make the native Antilopians nervous, anxious, and afraid of the Rajneeshi. And at this point, like we said, we have the county coming after them, and there's some vote about to go down at the county level. And I think it was at this point that, I don't know if it's Sheila's decision or whoever decided it, but they needed more people. So maybe Robert, you can fill us in on what they did to get more people for the Rajneeshi vote here, and maybe if you remember what the vote was actually for. I don't know if it was to totally shut down the ranch. Maybe you can go ahead and if you remember.
Yeah, that is a good question. I don't exactly remember what the vote was specifically for, but the Rajneeshis, were threatening to actually. It was for a county position or a county seat or something county-wide, because they already outnumbered the Antilopians. So they could easily, they essentially control the entire town council except for one token guy on that city council. But then the fight got bigger, and then the whole county got involved, and then the whole state got, angry and uppity and wanted to fight them. So yeah, they kind of sold it as a great humanitarian thing. And they said, everybody across the country, if you want to come to Rajneeshpuram, we'll give you a free bus ticket. And so what started happening was that in major like cities across the country, like all the homeless people would jump on these buses and drive across the country to go to Oregon. And they treated them well, they fed them, they clothed them, they bathed them, they gave them kind of work, a purpose, they gave them a community, a sense of friendship and communion. But you're also busing in a whole lot of probably mentally unstable people, or people that are very diverse and maybe have some mental health issues, or people that for whatever reason haven't made it in society, and maybe they just needed somebody to give them a chance. Maybe they just needed somebody to offer them the olive branch and give them a nice meal and give them a sense of purpose and whatnot. But they're also dealing with people that are just, no matter what you do, they need medication or whatever. And the Rajneeshis, they have an incident, and they actually Sheila gets like choked, like almost killed and murdered by one of these guys. And so their solution is to dose, spike the beer with Haldol. And so they're essentially drugging everybody without their knowledge. And I wondered how you guys felt about that.
Yeah, I thought about that quite a bit because I was like, well, in a way, it's a bit of a defensive thing, but it's a problem of their own making. And you're right. They did have this cover of, hey, we're going to try lifting up all these people and inviting them from across the country to live here, and we'll clothe them and feed them and whatever. But you're right. I mean, they're on the streets mostly for reasons that make them difficult to integrate with people in a community or society. Like they've probably got drug problems or mental health issues or other things. And there were some feel-good stories initially, but it was, at least as presented to me, I was like, oh, this is obviously to try to get their numbers up to win the county vote. Like there was no like two ways about it. But the mass drugging, I mean, it was a problem of their own making. They shouldn't have done it, but I can see why they wanted to do it, because they're like, this is a dangerous situation here. They got a bunch of people who are unstable, and a few of them have threatened violence to the point of actually committing violence, and you want to prevent that. So I'm a bit torn on it. I mean, they shouldn't have had them all come in the first place, but they would never have done that had the Antelopians and the county been a threat to their existence. Like it was another attempt to, within the legal realm at the time, bringing in more people to become citizens of that county within 30 days or whatever, or after 30 days, go down to the county courthouse, register to vote, and be able to sway the election in their favor. So they were trying to do it within legal means, but then, you started poking holes in the dam, and they're like trying to stick their fingers and thumbs in the dams, and the Haldol is one of those fingers.
Yeah. Just to go back, they brought in 6,000 people, and is a pretty small county. I mean, I don't think the population of Oregon, especially like that part of Oregon, is too high. It's pretty rural area, right? I mean, you guys are up that way. I mean, you can tell me better, but it seems like most of that the county and probably the surrounding counties are fairly rural parts. So pretty unpopulated, I would imagine.
Yeah, definitely. I thought that it was actually going to, if not necessarily work. I mean, if they had actually been able to vote, it would have been interesting to see if they would actually have won. But I don't know. When you start playing the game of government and fighting the government, it's a really tough game to play, because it really becomes a numbers and a resources game. And I wonder if they had been able to find a different way to placate, the people of Antelope, and to somehow, diffuse, because there's really at no point does either side ever kind of like take a step back and go, okay, this is getting too far. This is getting too out of hand. Can you just leave us alone and we'll leave you alone?
Listen, dude, that is the first thing I wrote down, honestly. Like when I started watching episode 3, the very first note I took is like, why couldn't these people just take a few hours, sit down, and talk about what each side wanted?
That's treason, Tony. That's treason.
That would be treason. And you can learn all about treason on don'twasteyourhate.com/46.
Yeah, it's exactly what you guys talked about, though. It's like they would rather, the mainstream media and now the left, of course, would rather go to war or threaten war than just talk to people, right? And that's a parallel in this wild country. So yeah, very, very in the moment type of thing here. But I also wanted to throw in, and I don't know if this is towards the end of episode 3, but because they brought in all of these people and they were trying to follow the letter of the law, they're here for 30 days, let's go register at the courthouse, they get denied at the courthouse. So it just goes to show you that when you do play the government's game, they will change the rules on you at the last minute to benefit themselves. Like the Antelopians were clearly within the confines of whatever the statutes were. They were following it to the letter. And then the county just said, no, we're not doing it, because they knew what it meant. They knew that if they allowed this to happen, then they would lose this vote. And so the Rajneeshis then responded with the poisoning.
And that's actually the next episode. So I don't know how much we want to go into that. I think that's the beginning of episode 4 or the end of the 3rd. So I haven't watched episode 4. So I don't really know much. I watched the first 5 minutes and then I turned it off. So I would be fresh for this episode.
All right. Well, I won't spoil it for you, but essentially the idea is, well, we can't legally have these people vote. So we're going to try to cut the numbers on the opposing side from being physically able to vote.
Yeah, and that's insane. And I can't wait to hear more about that on the next episode, because that's when it really gets turned on. Episode 4, episode 3 is kind of like I said in the beginning, the arms race starts to happen. They start to really like ramp up. And then I think things are just going to explode going forward. But yeah, when they rejected all of the voters, that in the chronology, at least as far as I wrote it down, that actually happens first. Then you get Sheila being attacked, and then you get the Haldol situation. When they realize, hey, maybe we're not going to win this way, the voting way, and the new people are getting restless here. And I mean, listen, this is and I know this whole thing kind of ends up on a conversation about immigration toward the end of it in a different way. But this is kind of like a microcosm of the immigration thing, when you have different groups of people all coming into an area where maybe certain people feel established, and then all these fears start rising up. And it even happens within the Rajneeshi group, because I think most of the people following Osho were either, from India, but the majority of them seem to be Americans, Europeans, just kind of well-to-do Westerners who are young and hippie-ish. I mean, this is, maybe like almost a decade and a half or so after, the hippie thing really, died down, or 10 years after that anyway. But it's still that kind of mentality. And you have these people, and then they bring in all these homeless people who are totally of a different socioeconomic status. They probably have not, been educated the way the Westerners up at the Rajneeshpuram have. So this is like a big clash of cultures. And, the way they decide to keep them under control is put, what is it called? Haldol in their beer, right? So
yeah, I got to try that, man. I got to see what that's like.
And it's so sad, though. I mean, I was watching it with my wife, and she was like so upset when she saw this happening, because it's like you rip these people off the street, give them the promise of a better life. They turn out to not suit your purpose. And then so you're just going to sedate them. They're basically just tranquilizing these people. And, for all the talk about, the whole first episode was all about, America has the Constitution. They respect individual rights. And it just goes back to this, people are just using this thing to get what they want. It was never about rights for them. It was about, hey, this is what we want. And if you get in our way, maybe I'll just poison your beer and put you in like a semi-comatose state, or, at least a sedated state. I mean, it's pretty disgusting, I think, honestly, to go way back to Robert's question 10 minutes ago.
Right. But back to your point, they should have not even had an issue or resolved it with, without resorting to government violence, because a lot of this stuff was due to the escalation. The Rajneeshis had to respond in kind, like, hey, we're trying to play by your rules, and you're fucking us every time we do. So fuck you too,
For sure. I just, and I'm not mad about that. What I'm mad about is bringing in a vulnerable third party and shitting on them in the process. That makes both sides bad. I mean, it doesn't, in my mind, I mean, okay, you got to defend yourself at some point, but it is tough for me to wrap my head around doing this to these homeless people and still taking their side 100%. I don't know. What do you think, Robert? Well,
yeah, the homeless thing, it seemed like they were a tool to be exploited. I don't know if the Rajneeshis ever really had the intention to really bring them into the fold and really, bring them on board and have them become Rajneeshis.
Yeah, that was the
that they were more just a tool to vote and win the vote and then probably get kicked out into the cold. But I have to wonder, if you look back in history and even through today, anytime the legal means of dispute resolution are taken away from a group. So the Rajneeshis had this kind of dispute and they wanted to really resolve it by being able to vote and then, defending themselves through the vote. So by denying them these new voters, you're basically removing the legal means with which for them to defend themselves. And so then what would you expect them to do? What is their other remaining option? Well, it's violence, direct in your face violence. And this is what illegal activity groups have had to deal with since, their activities have been deemed illegal, like in the drug war or the mafia or any kind of gangs. If you have a dispute between two mafia gangs, you can't take them to court. You solve your problems either through mediation or with violence. And it didn't seem like the Antelopians or the state in Oregon was really open to any kind of mediation. I don't know if an olive branch was offered on either side. I mean, we don't really get that story. So it seemed like Sheila was way more open to be gangster with it than to offer the olive branch on her side, because really, what did the state want? The state wanted them gone. The state wanted them destroyed. Just not necessarily killed, but, broken up and leave. And the Rajneeshis were like, why should we? And if you take away their legal rights and legal ability to, defend themselves that way, then it shouldn't come to anybody's surprise that they, escalated up and started attacking people physically.
Yeah, and I'm going to take us on a little side tangent. I know we need to start wrapping this up, but this reminds me of using the political means to advance ideas like we have, not having rulers, being more laissez-faire, free market, libertarianism in the Ron Paul vein. And I want to take it two different ways here, phrasing. One is they kept Ron Paul out of the debate in, I think, 2008 or 2012. And he was like in the running for it. He was in the lead or whatever, he qualified for it. And they screwed him. They changed the rules to suit their ends to prevent him from participating. And it just strikes me that if libertarianism ever really got a significant foothold in the political realm, which is bizarre to me because libertarianism is really the antithesis of politics. But just for the argument's sake, I mean, there is a Libertarian Party and it was founded on decent principles way back in the day. But just imagine if we actually did get decent traction again, like during the Ron Paul movement or moment. And Tony and Jeff were talking about this on their recent episode. Dave Smith and Tom Woods and Jason Stapleton, Mance Raider, and a couple of others have thrown their hat in with the Mises Caucus. Well, imagine if they actually do get some successes and some wins. How are the rules then going to be changed to fuck them over? And I don't know, man. I just think that the state has such an vested interest in maintaining their position. They'll do a number of unscrupulous things to maintain that position. I mean, that's what the whole education system is about, and the intellectual class is all for cover for this type of thing. And I know Pat's not here, and he would be putting his conspiracy theory hat on right now. But man, I really think that the state ingrains itself in certain areas of the culture and of society in order to cover itself, in order to maintain its hold on young minds and by extension, as they age. So anyway,
Yeah, and you
take
see
it
that.
sideways there, but
Well, you see that exactly the same thing happened in the Democratic caucus with the Hillary Clinton screwing over, just changing the rules and screwing over, Bernie Sanders. And then even the Republicans were like, okay, what do we need to do? How do we change these rules so that Donald Trump doesn't get the nomination? It's just an entrenched, essentially an oligarchy that will just do whatever it needs to do, principles or rules be damned, to get what they want. And that's what you see in Antelope and the Oregonians. I mean, they were just willing to do whatever to get rid of these people.
Yeah, and excuse me. What it seems to be is, everyone who uses the government to, the government is a tool, and it's a very vicious tool. It's a very scary tool, but different groups will use it to get what they want. And I think, just to comment on the Libertarian Party thing, I think the idea of libertarians eventually winning elections and all that kind of stuff, like, yeah, the rules will be changed against us and all that, and it's definitely not going to work smoothly. It's not going to be an easy thing, but as long as the people doing it have like that principled libertarian viewpoint in their minds, and they just keep working toward it that way, even if the dents are small, and even if it's an incremental thing, or even if it doesn't work at all. I mean, as long as they try it with like a purity in some way, like a Ron Paul type, who he didn't really compromise his principles, but he was still in government. I mean, a real purist can say, oh, just being in government in general is compromising your principles. And sure, I mean, if you're going to be that pure, but in some ways you do have to live in reality. And if most of the population is paying attention to presidential politics once every 4 years, then it'd be good if people can get their voice heard one way or the other. I mean, because Ron Paul, I mean, as much as people love, Rothbard and Mises and, Harry Brown and, people like that. I mean, Ron Paul was the guy to spread this message from 2008 and 2012. Again, I think he made more libertarians than anyone did in history, except for maybe like Ayn Rand. So, I mean, you got to get involved in some way. At least have some people in there with the voice. I think just to let the general population hear the message, or else the message doesn't get heard. If you're not putting your hat in the arena.
Yeah, and I think that's where I have to give Ron Paul a pass, is because he had to use the means available to him, afforded to him, that, as stupid as Bubis Americanus is, the things they pay attention to and get outraged by are presidential politics. Like, if you don't have a voice on that platform, then you might as well not even have a voice. And so that's the extent of my pragmatism. Like, I don't think that anyone should be, I'll be careful how I say this. I wouldn't expect a principled libertarian to win. But just getting out the message and, like you said, staying consistent. I think that was the problem with Rand Paul during his presidential bid, was that he compromised. He was just like trying to be a little bit more Me Too, like the other 11, milquetoast, neocon Republican types, with a little bit more libertarian rhetoric. So, not quite as good as Ronald Reagan, but also not, if he had stuck with principle, then people who cared about that kind of thing. And I think that the people who care about that kind of thing are passionately caring about that kind of a thing. It's not like this wishy-washy middle, right, that everyone seems to be fighting over. Like, if you stuck to the principles, then you would get that core contingent. I think who coined the term? They call it the remnant. It's the real hardcore people who are keeping the spark alive. Those are the people that are really going to get things done, and that's going to be the building of consciousness, and getting these ideas out there. And we do it in our own small way. We've got a show, you've got a show. We're all part of the Libertarian Union, libertarianunion.com. By the way, we just updated the site, new look and everything. Now there's a page for all dozen of the shows. And we're going to be doing a State Libertarian Union talk show, I think, next week. So look for more from us on that. But anyway, we can go back to Osho.
Well, I don't think anything else really happened this episode. The only other thing that I wrote down that might be interesting for us to explore, it might be too much of a something to wrap our heads around right now. It might take too long. Robert, you let me know what you think. But I wrote down that, the problem here is that a lot of these people, like, they're not content. Like Sheila, for example, she's not content to just have their little compound or their little city, with the guru. Like, ultimately she's like, oh, this is going to show the universe how it's supposed to be. Like, there's like a big, like, megalomaniacal thing about people who they can't, it's not like that kind of what makes libertarians different. Like, because we're just kind of like, okay, like, we don't really know how you're supposed to live, really, but maybe a few guidelines here and there, and everything else is like, you do what you want to do, leave me alone, I'll leave you alone, blah, blah, blah. But, a lot of people, it's like, they can't stop there. They're like, oh, we're going to figure out how to live, and then we're going to make sure all of you people know about it and do exactly like we do. And I thought it might be interesting to discuss how this could have gone down if we lived in, actual anarchy. If we lived in a situation where the property rights were respected, there's no government that you can take over and then make, zoning ordinances and whatnot. Like, I feel like things could have gone a lot differently in Ancapistan here.
Yeah, that's fun to speculate on for sure. But let me just reiterate and go back to something you guys were talking about just a few minutes, and then I'll go back to this. But having libertarians throw their hat into the ring in the political process, I am not a believer in the political process, but I do recognize that human beings don't necessarily really search out information. They pretty much just pay attention to and are outraged by what happens in their news feed or their Twitter feed or their Facebook feed. And if you're not contributing to that, if you're not showing up in that feed, then they're really not, throwing a whole lot of brain cycles at what you're talking about. So they're not going to even know to respond and think about your ideas if they're not getting put out there. So I do recognize that. That's for sure. Now, what would, the effect of Rajneesh Puram be on Ancapistan is an interesting idea. Like Sheila, she was definitely proud of what they had accomplished. You get that sense, especially in the first two episodes, where they're just beaming about what they had accomplished in this city. Now, it was definitely an achievement. I got to give them props. They worked their asses off, and I don't know if necessarily they were innovating so much as they were just, a bunch of people got together and did the best they could with what they knew. And it seemed like they did something perfectly fine. As far as terms as a way to organize society, I'm a little skeptical. Like, yeah, if she was like a maniacal person, and she seemed to have that tendency, but I don't necessarily know if she was going to force her ideas on anybody else, but maybe she was. It seemed to be a voluntary collective. Would these ideas spread? Would it be the best way to organize a group of people? Maybe for them it was, but yeah, I'm skeptical. I mean, there's always going to be a certain number of people in the planet that these ideas are attractive to. I mean, but how widespread would that be? Yeah, who knows? I don't think it would necessarily be for me, that's for sure, but maybe for a bunch of people would want to get together. And, we say it all the time, if the communists want to get together and have their little communes, and yeah, the dishes won't get washed and the laundry won't get done, but you could do it. I mean, whatever, we don't care. Just keep it to yourselves. You don't, but what we see a lot of the times is that the communists will say, no, the whole world needs to go to communism or else it won't work. Everybody has to at the point of a gun. And that's, of course, where I draw the line.
Yeah, for sure. And on top of just whether their little commune would work, I mean, I doubt it would work. I mean, honestly, the only reason they had money to begin with was from whatever the capitalists, the capitalist parents of these people who went into the group brought all the money from. Like the money didn't come from nowhere. They made a lot of money in productive ways and then put it into all this. But I was more interested, or I am more interested in the dispute resolution in Ancapistan. How would the dispute resolution go between these what would be private property owners, and there would be no local city government per se? I mean, there could be homeowners associations, but you would imagine there would be an easy way to secede from a homeowners association. So what do you think about that, Daniel? Like, how would this? I feel like this dispute would be resolved in a much more peaceful way if in an Ancapistan type place where NAP is and private property rights are respected.
Yeah, and it would probably depend on how much of the world was in Ancapistan. Like if it's going to be a seasteading type thing, or like Doug Casey's trying to get one of those African dictators to like go full bore free market, and have like Chad be the Libtopia in Africa or something like that. Yeah, I think with property rights, you would have a different story here, and we'd also be so much better off, so moving wouldn't be as big of a deal. Like if some rowdy, crazy neighbors moved in, well, okay, I don't like it, but I can't like do anything against them violently. There's no daddy government to run to. So if I prefer to, not be around them, then I guess I'll move. And it's kind of sounds shitty, but the means would be more readily available to do so. But also I don't think they would have had to run to this area to do it. Like there's so many counterfactual things that you could just speculate on. But anyway, I know that Pat's been trying to keep these to under an hour, and I know we're about an hour now. So we might need to leave it here and then get into leading up to episode 4, unless you want to cover any last things before we do that.
I don't have anything. Do you have anything else to add, Robert?
Well, yeah, we could briefly discuss maybe like DROs and how the free market would settle disputes. But I feel like that conversation has been done. There are many talks about DROs and how disputes would be done in a free market. I mean, a dispute resolution organization or a private mediator would get a reputation for being able to resolve disputes, and they could really get together and both agree on that sort of thing. If there's really acts of aggression that have occurred, I mean, I didn't really see a whole lot of private property loss in this show. I mean, other than, up to this point. I thought it was funny when the Rajneeshis became cops, and now all the citizens of Antelope really bristled at that. They're like, I don't mind getting arrested by a cop, but he better not be wearing pink on his time off or whatever. It's like, okay, I appreciate that. I don't like cops either. It's nice to see you don't like cops, but it really shows how shallow you are when you just don't like the way they live their life. I want the guy who's arresting me to like John Wayne and smoke cigars. Okay, that makes it okay. What? Anyway, yeah, let's wrap this up though.
All right. So again, like Dan mentioned, it does start to ramp up starting episode 4 with some poisonings occurring. So we'll look forward to getting into that story on episode 4, which again, the whole series can be found at libertyweekly.net/WWC. This episode, libertyweekly.net/85. The show notes will have links to the series, and I imagine my show at don'twasteyourhate.com, and then these guys, actualanarchy.com, as well as the Last Nighters. So we'll link all that there. And I think Pat is coming back for the next one. Am I right about that, guys?
I've heard rumors that he might not be back until the 6th episode, and 4 might be with the guys from Peaceful Treason, which would be a lot of fun. I've never talked with them before, so that could be really interesting. And if I may, I'd like to plug just a couple of things real quick. The first thing, Robert, I meant to tell you about this, but Tom Woods had Dave Smith on his episode 1199, so tomwoods.com/1199. And he mentioned us not by name, but by concept.
Oh,
He
yeah.
said, oh, there's a show out there that's libertarianism and movies, and that's a great idea. And that's a great way, if you don't have a name for yourself, to find a niche that has traction and people like it already, and just marry up libertarianism with it. And then he mentioned the Culinary Libertarian, which is another friend of mine. And so that was like a really cool thing. So I chimed in the comments on the YouTube video just to like say, hey, that's us. So people, know, because he didn't do the name drop. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is this upcoming Friday, on the 27th, I'm going to be featured on Blast Off with Johnny Rocket, which is a show that comes out on Fridays once a week, and his co-host, Raylene Lightheart. And so they interview me for an hour and a half, and that can be found at thelaunchpadmedia.com. So that's coming out Friday.
Very good. Okay, Robert, do you have anything you want to plug, or?
Daniel's the plugger. He wears the plugs in the family. He's good at it.
Hey, it's all real, baby.
All right. I figured. And as far as marrying up libertarian niche with another niche, I guess the don't waste your hate niche would be like maybe cultural and societal commentary mixed with libertarianism, I guess you could say, or anarchism. So yeah, definitely check out our show. If you enjoyed the conversation tonight, that's don'twasteyourhate.com. You can find it on iTunes, Stitcher, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We do video as well as audio. And you can check us out on BitChute, I think, too. So do that. And I just want to thank Patrick, first of all, for asking me to guest host. I've had a good time. And again, Daniel and Robert, always good to talk to you guys. It's been a while since we've been on a call together, so I was happy to talk to you. And we'll see y'all for episode 4 or episode 86 for the Liberty Weekly podcast. Peace, y'all.
Peace.